Little, pardon me? Yeah, let's. I did want to say a little bit about schools in Adelaide, and then we'll come back and show some of this stuff. I was at the district office in Pastoral today. This is not the original, but they were able to find the original records from Sutherland School for my relatives. And it's really kind of amazing, particularly when you think of all the time and effort that we put into records now and all kinds of testing and everything. So basically the general record says things like Francis Dubost, born 11/18/12, parent A. Dubost, meaning Alexandrine Dubost. And that's about it. And this was a report card. For my dad it said, Raymond is weak in his work, needs individual assistance. My dad had lost an eye, by the way, in an accident on the property. They were underneath the old house, and he and his brother were playing around, sticking piano wire through a hole and looking at it. Came through, scratched his eye, got infected. He ended up going to San Francisco. They couldn't save it. He had just a fog for the rest of his life in that eye. But interestingly enough, talk about the marvels of modern medicine. Later in life, he got cataracts in his one eye. And of course, he was really scared to get surgery when you only have one eye. Believe it or not, they said that if that didn't work, they thought they could restore sight in the eye that he hadn't seen out of for 60-some years. The other thing that happened with my dad that I wanted to mention is he got an acute appendicitis, which at the time, again, could kill you. Yeah. And he ended up spending 36 days in the old Atascadero Hospital up on the hill with Grandma taking him ice and whatnot, trying to keep him alive. And when he was a senior at Paso Robles High School, he weighed about 90 pounds, and that was it. And he would complain to me about the bullies and how the ranch kids that rode horses and the ranch kids that looked dressed a little different were really bullied by some of the kids. And I hope I'm not offending anybody with this, but I remember as a kid, television commercials coming on for Linden's of Lompoc. Does anybody remember Linden's of Lompoc, a furniture store down there? For a while they were advertising quite a bit. And that Linden had gone to Paso Robles High School. And every time that ad came on, my dad would tell me the same story about when he was recovering from that appendicitis and weighed 90 pounds as a senior in high school, that Linden's of Lompoc, Cal Linden or something, would intentionally slam him into lockers and push him around and everything, and some of the football players would make fun of him because he was such a weakling and wasn't a football player. That's one of the reasons I have such an awareness or affinity to make sure that the kids that are being bullied are protected. So anyway, these were the original records. Kind of an interesting aside on that is he didn't go to the Sunderland School, which was down by the mine, for the entire time. The school is gone. This is right at the point where Cypress Mountain Road kicks off to the left, and if you go on the right, you go on Los Talos, there's a big rock there that they used to play on. And he would tell stories that at the time, the school teachers all had to be single women. You probably remember this, that no teacher could be married. And you can imagine what they thought that the kids might have if they thought that it was a married woman in front of them. So it was either a widow or a spinster. And I remember vaguely, when I was very, very little, one of his teachers was still alive, and we went down to Garden Farms and saw her right before she died. But they had an incredible task. Imagine having, can you show the picture of in school? Do we have that? This is the Sunderland School in 1925. If any of you knew the Dodds, that's Errol Dodd, and he looked like that when he was late in life. You could tell it was Errol Dodd. My dad is the one looking like this. I don't know if it was because of his eye or whatever. And this is my Uncle Francis, and then Ramage kids and Dodd kids as well. But they didn't all go to the same school every year. And I asked him, how come you went to the Lincoln School, it's now the Adelade School, sometimes, and sometimes you went to Sunderland School? Anybody know why? It's really kind of comical if you think about it right now. The County Office of Education said that they would only keep a one-room schoolhouse open if they had a minimum number of kids. And whatever the minimum was that they set at that time, all the families got together and farmed the kids out so that you keep them all open. Yes. So you went to whatever school you had to ride to keep that neighborhood school open. Kind of an interesting commentary on today in schools and whatnot. So anyway, that's the Sunderland School right by, another story he used to tell about that I remember is that one of his teachers, not all of them were as good as others. I will say that he got a great education. He really did. A lot of personalized instruction, high standards, and he could have gone on in college if he wanted to, But he was kind of picked because of having the one eye and being slight to stay home and take care of the place while everybody else went off to college. But he said one of their teachers would tell them to read and would promptly fall asleep. And as soon as the teacher fell asleep, they'd all go play in the mine. And so they'd go run up and play in the mercury and whatnot and do all kinds of stuff. And then they'd come back and she'd wake up and demand to know which of the kids had done that. Well, not all of them went, but he said, you know, we all got punished whether we went or not. All she had to do was look underneath their desk, and if there was red dust there, you'd been playing in the mercury, and if there wasn't, but she made us all confess, even though the evidence was right in front of them. It almost made him mad. So he said, I figured I might as well go. If you're going to get busted no matter what, you might as well go and have some fun. But most of the teachers there were really, really good.
Tell him the story, though, about what he said about his school bringing when he went to Stanford with you and sat in all your classes. That's a great story.
I am not smarter than the average bear. I truly am not. But my grandmother, Mabel Curtis, who I'm going to tell you a story about in just a second, from when she taught in Paso Robles, basically raised me. My parents got divorced when I was less than a year old. It just didn't work out at all. Very unusual at the time. Again, a marked contrast to the way things are now. I was typically growing up the only kid that came from a divided family, all the way through elementary school. Every single family had both parents. And it was embarrassing. Any of you who work in schools or know now, you would never now presume to say to Mike Smith's mom, Mrs. Smith, nice to meet you, because more than half the time it seems like not the same name. But it was very unusual at that time. And so I was raised, though, in San Diego by my grandmother, who taught me to read before I went to school. And that was my leg up. And that's, if you've heard me ever talk about anything in my time in Templeton or now in Paso Robles, if I could wave a magic wand and do one thing, if kids could read at grade level in 3rd grade, when you make the transition from learning to read to reading to learn for content, it's almost 100% that you'll graduate from high school on time, if you know that. If you don't, it's hard to ever catch up, because if you're pulled out for something else, you're missing the content of science or whatever at that time. But anyway, that's a long way to get to. I ended up, at 16, I ended up skipping 2 grades because I knew how to read and they didn't know what to do with me, so they kept skipping me grades. Thankfully, they don't do it anymore. So when I graduated from high school, I was barely 16 years old, and I got into Stanford. So I get taken up to Stanford. My dad helped move me up in his 55 Ford. Got moved into my freshman dorm, and he came back sometime later, and he was there bringing up something else, and I had to go off to a chemistry class. So I said, Dad, you're paying for all this. Why don't you come and sit in on a class? So we march off to Chem 1. At the time I was pre-med, bad idea. Organic chemistry made me into the English major that I should have been. But anyway, here's my dad watching the chemistry lecture, and it's on dry cell batteries. Well, guess what? My dad, running the phone company, knew quite a bit about dry cell batteries. We walked out of the lecture and he said, tell me again, while we're spending all this money, I knew all that. Didn't need to go to Stanford to be told how a battery works. So anyway, thank you for moving that anecdote with him. I forget what the next slide is.
All right, well, let's just click it and see.
Oh, it's just back to questions. Let me share a couple of things with you. This is something that I think maybe your dad, Ted, found looking through Grandma's old stuff. But this is, and it's kind of ironic that I should bring it up today, because I was telling Laura Brooks that I spent all day today in negotiations with the teachers union in Paso Robles, which is going fine. But in 1951, my maternal grandmother, Mabel Curtis, was a teacher at Bauer. And she was president of what at the time was not a union, because they didn't have unions at the time, but it was called the Teachers Club. Okay? And so this was their program from back at that time. And the really interesting thing is, listen to these names. Paso Robles Teachers Club officers, 1951-52. President, Mabel Curtis, my grandmother. Vice President, Virginia Peterson, who was her best friend. And when I got hired back at Templeton High School, the first person in the community who came to visit me was Virginia Peterson, to tell me about my grandma and how much she had meant to her. And I'm so glad that Joel Peterson is coming back on the school board in Paso Robles, because that connection is really, really special to me. Secretary Mary Brubaker, Treasurer Nancy Stinchfield, Building Representatives George Brown, Mildred Finley, Intermediate Nora Gamble, Primary Helen Coburn, and Union High Route South. And so this is the original from 1951 when my mom, or excuse me, my grandmother was president of what then was the Teachers Association there in Paso Robles. A couple other things that I wanted to show you. We mentioned the Adelade Rural Telephone Company. This is what the phone looked like, if any of you remember these. This was until 1960. This is what we had. And if I remember correctly, our phone number was 2 longs and a short. So it'd be like, rah, 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 and that meant it was you. But everybody on the party line, let's face it, not much happened in Adelaide in those days. If somebody got a phone call, everybody wanted to know what was going on. It was like a car driving by. Now there's wine taster. Back in the day, didn't happen that much. In fact, I remember I'd be out in the barn mucking out mangers for the sheep with my dad or whatever, and a car would go by, and he didn't have to look up. Didn't even look up. He'd say, I've been telling Bunch Dot he's got to get that cylinder fixed. That thing's just not sounding right at all. He didn't even need it. Brilliant when it came to anything mechanical whatsoever. But he operated this until 1960. And in fact, he told me that at the time he had to help out, I don't remember the guy's name, that had the phone company that went to the east. He was sick, and so he had to take over helping with that out toward Shandon. And he was the one that got the call in what would have been I don't remember, of the crash at Chelam. Of, what's his name? James Dean. Came through the Adelaide Telephone Company because it having been him covering for the one out to Shandon. This also, there's a lot of his stuff is in the Historical Museum. This was also his little repair line that he would go with. I remember, my dad never abandoned me. He came to get me every vacation, even though it was all the way down to San Diego. He would make it a point to come and bring me up every single chance and make sure that I always knew that my home was in Adelaide. And my mom moved around a lot, so that always was my home. But I'd come up, and of course, being a city boy, I wanted to snow. You know, snow for Christmas, white Christmas. My dad, the worst thing in his life was a severe storm. Everybody knows why, right? The Adelaide Rural Telephone Company was 2 lines on a 4x6 heartwood redwood pole with those old insulators. Boy, do I regret all the time I spent shooting those as a kid, and because boy, they're worth a lot of money now, particularly the colored ones.
Yes.
But it was awful. If there was a snowstorm, he'd have to go out in the freezing cold to try and get the lines restored, particularly out to the 7X Ranch, which is up Cypress Mountain from where I just described, about halfway over the hill. And that was just an absolute booger to try and keep that line open if there was a storm going on. So I would get to sit in that big room if you're about the 7X. Had a great big open room with all kinds of game on the walls and everything. And I would sit there and listen to stories from D. Fitzy while my dad fixed the phones there back in the day. But it was really, really good for me, I think, to have both the exposure to the big city and life there, and yet to be grounded by having the background in Adelaide that I have. It seems like I've left a lot out. How are we doing on time? Ooh.
I think it's, yeah.
Let me just look through and see if there's anything else I wanted to make sure. Oh, I know one thing that I wanted to mention. When the Clow Mine closed and the Buena Vista closed, there were all kinds of houses there, shacks and whatnot, that needed to be disposed of. Some of them were trashed. Many of them, though, ended up, anybody know where? San Miguel. San Miguel, a lot of them were moved to San Miguel, and they got together all of the local charcoal cutters. Back in the day when there were charcoal pits out there. And I remember our local guy was Chitus, who operated on our property, and they all got together and trimmed all of the roads from Clow Mine up through Adelaide and into San Miguel so that those houses could be moved. So a lot of those old houses that weren't on original foundations in San Miguel came from the Clow Mine and the Buena Vista Mine, including the biggest, nicest house, which is pretty small, is one that my Uncle Mo bought and lived in until he died and left it to us, and is the one that you guys now live in out there. That's an old house from the Clow Mine that you guys have as the old rental house there. Yeah. So a little background on that. Let me just, by the way, Chitus, you probably know that charcoal was the primary source of fuel. That's why in Europe the forests are all planted in rows is because they were all mowed down for charcoal back in the day for the Industrial Revolution and whatnot. There were an awful lot of charcoal pits here. There's only one remaining that I can think of that's on Cloud Mine Road. You can just see where it was. But again, it's a fairly simple thing. You built usually into a side hill, a big smokehouse. You put all the green oak wood in there that you'd cut, and then you got it going, and then cut the oxygen to it so it became charcoal. So there were pits like that all over the place. And as I said, Chitus was ours. I'll never forget though, does anybody remember back in the 1960s when there was a gas explosion at a bar in Paso Robles right on the park?
Yeah.
Huge explosion. He was killed in that. He was one of the people that was killed in that explosion way back when.
Just remove all the brains and stuff.
Yeah.
Just talk about it.
Just want to make sure there was anything else I meant to say for sure. My grandmother Alexandria was a remarkable woman. I do want to mention more about her. As I said, in like 1910, she gets a telegram and she gets to move to California to marry her cousin, who, by all accounts, my dad said, wasn't much worse, at least not as much as his brother was. And so she had a rough time of it. I remember her telling me stories of the first year that she was here, and there was a huge snowstorm and the stock had nothing to eat. And so she, as a young girl, climbed into the oak trees and pulled down the Spanish moss and kept the stock alive during that huge blizzard way back when. She ran the general store and post office until 1936. We have here,
It's here.
this is the, there's the
That's-
last.
That's the last, right here. So this is the postcard from Alexandria, and that's the last.
We have one of my dear friends, if you went to Cal Poly, know Don Moss, his son Nate Moss was my director of student services in Paso Robles before he went to Santa Maria, and he got online and managed to get a copy of the last piece of postage that was ever sent from the Adelaide post office on December 31st, 1936. So this is the original one right here. The other thing that we found, that Kate's going to tell you about, is my grandmother only went back to France one time. She hated war, just hated war, from the relatives that had been lost and sending Mo off to both World War II and Korea. And she was just really, really against war. She went back to France one time in the 1950s with her daughter Anne. But this is a postcard that she sent to her best friend, and Kate's going to tell you about it.
Yeah, it really brings home what a small world this is, because it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even further, longer than that. We got an email from a woman in London, and she collected antique postcards, and she bought this postcard in a store in London. And she started researching it, and the picture, I mean, it's remarkable. We don't keep it out in the light very often, but the colors are still remarkable. The picture on the postcard is a restored LA Times newsroom. Now, and the postmark is Adelade, California, and it's like 1912. And so at that time, they were trying to unionize the papers in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, and they had firebombed the newsroom at the LA Times. So this was commemorating the rebuilding of it. One of my favorite times of sharing this was with an LA Times newspaper writer that had been to the winery, which was just, and you're just telling me we're running out of time?
I was told to be done by 7. I just realized.
Okay, hello. All right, so we got this notice, and she bought this, and through the wonders of the World Wide Web, she started saying who would sell these postcards. People who sell newspapers. Who sells newspapers? Stores. Was there a store in Adelaide? So she found it, and this was Adelaide wrote to her, Alexandria wrote to her friends in France. And she got the postcard and returned it to us. Wow. And so this postcard went from Adelaide to France to London, back home again, which was a pretty amazing story.
You know, I don't speak or read French, but I'm told that it says, doing well, have a fat baby boy, you know, miss you, that kind of thing.
But I do want to say the translation, I didn't bring it, I'm sorry I didn't, but she ends it because it's to her friend, her dear friend. And she says, I hope you're doing well in your dressmaking business. You'll be successful at whatever you do, which is, I thought was a pretty go-girl thing to say to her girlfriend in 1912.
Yeah.
So,
The other thing that we wanted to show you were the old brands. Raymond, you want to show the brands, please? This was the first brand for, again, my great-grandfather and grandfather, A. Dubost. And my dad always said that that was the best brand ever, that it would take really, really well.
yeah.
He had his own brand. Yeah. Which was R. Dubost. And to the inexperienced eye, that looks to me like it would be just as good or better. He said it never worked. Never worked. A was way better.
Yeah.
And as you can see, my dad's name was Raymond William, and his namesake is Raymond Dubost here, who is following in his footsteps, who is all cowboy, and going to be taking over the ranch property, and along with his other sister and brothers, cousins. But I do want to end by saying, with all of the changes in Adelaide, the absolute blessing of my life, I think, is that I have a grandson and grandkids who are interested in keeping the ranch. Because it's such a struggle now with the billionaires moving in on all sides and sinking deep wells.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth, can you want to show them too? Did you have one to show?
She's got one, yes.
The other A?
Third one.
And that was the other A. Stand up and show it. Again, my dad, they lost that brand. He couldn't use it anymore, and he always wanted to get the AD back if he possibly could. So with that, I think I'll conclude and answer any questions. I hope it hasn't been too boring. This, by the way, is the corporate stamp for the Adelaide Rural Telephone Company.
Oh, wow.
So this is what went on to all of his.
Yeah, it's hard to pull up. There you go.
The corporate stamp, the original corporate stamp. So again, thank you for your time, and it's so good to see so many old friends.
Are there any questions for,
Questions?
okay?
We did bring an extra one of these History of Adelaide if anybody wants to look.